YouTube? What's good with you, YouTube? It's your man Nacy. What's going on, y'all? Just want to stop by, man, and drop some jewels, man. I really been like thinking about this war that that we got going on in Ukraine and Russia. That's been embroiled for like the last 8 days. If you're sleeping under a rock somewhere, you probably don't know what we're talking about or what I'm talking about. But I'm sure everybody is pretty familiar with what's going on, based on just the media and the fact that we really haven't seen a conflict at this level on European shores. None of us, most of us haven't seen it in our lifetime. I'm sure it's probably a one or two people that have watched this video that's probably been around when we had those kind of conflicts on the European continent. But at this point, most of us have not, witnessed war within the European continent like at this level. We had Yugoslavia, we had Bosnia, but at this level where, it wasn't intra fighting, where it's another country trying to take over another country, where that was more ethnic more than anything. But my take on it has kind of evolved. Not so much that it's changed, but it's just kind of evolved. Like, I understand, like, for me personally, just in my personal opinion, I think that Putin did this based on a myriad of things. And in this little short video, I'll talk about those myriad of things. First and foremost, I think that a lot of us don't understand his pushback against NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organizations, right? Which is, some European countries and a few American countries that all border the Atlantic Ocean. Only ones I think don't belong is like Finland and Sweden, like up in the Baltic area. But I think for the most part, you have a lot of new members that, really trying to keep Russia off their back. Now, NATO is really about, the North Atlantic Treaty is just to kind of keep peace in the North Atlantic region, which would be like Europe, America, Canada, Western civilization, as they would say. And I feel as though, like, this war is not our fight. Like, I have this saying, African Americans, we don't have a dog in this fight. I don't want to use the terminology that I was using in other social spaces because I don't want this video to get flagged. I really want the video to be like a real, concrete and void of like, descriptors that might get me in trouble. I just really want to talk about the geopolitical strategies or the geopolitical effects of it and the aftermath of it and what will happen in the long term, in my opinion, just based on my understanding of geopolitics and my understanding of Europe and just where we at as a nation and what empires do. Putin whole thing is, not only is it the browning of West, west of him, Ukraine, Poland, what I mean? Even some Baltic, even within, some southern places like Moldova and places like that, you have non-European whites or non-whites coming from India, coming from Pakistan, coming from Africa, right? Now, seeking like O'Shea Duke Jackson. Like, O'Shea Duke Jackson is an American citizen, American brother, who's in Ukraine trying to study for medical school, right? They say it's cheaper, it's affordable, you know what I mean? So it's a valuable option for, non-Ukrainian citizens to go and get their medical degrees or get any higher learning degree or some for military training, just based on, what's taking place over there, like what's really going on over there. So for me, the war is more like a hold off. Like, yo, like, listen, y'all pressing too far. I mean, it's almost like, you as you get these new NATO nations, you get closer and closer to, being able to, put surveillance and observe everything Russia is doing to a certain degree. Like, you're not gonna get it all. You're not gonna be totally, outside of the spies you already got. You're not gonna totally get everything they're doing strategically, but you can amass a lot of information just by having access to such a close border in Ukraine. And I think like Putin is doing this for his legacy. Here you have a 70-year-old man, who's a staunch. He was a KGB officer. He was a staunch, Russian, right? This is nationalism for him, and this is not only nationalism. It's the USSR empire, right? That excuse me, that included a lot of nations that we now see, the Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Poland, all these nations once belonged to the USSR until 1991 when it broke up, based on, finances, based on its failed attempt in Afghanistan. They got a saying, that's where empires go to die, in Afghanistan. So just based on a lot of turmoil, economic strife, political strife within Russia during that time, it broke up what we know as the USSR. You know what I mean? United Soviet Socialist Republics, right? Where it was just a bunch of republics that was, not loosely connected to Russia, but concretely connected to Russia, based on the empire, based on Russia's power, based on Russia's ability to bring them in and have ethnic and familiar connections in those regions that we know was once upon the USSR. It's so many factors that's playing themselves out in this war. The one thing that just keeps like really playing in my head is how the Western media is really like in lock and step. Like they're all on one accord when it comes to like, reporting this war, right? Like journalism has went out the window, and journalistic integrity has went out the window. Objectivity has went out the window. It's pretty much Russia is the big bad wolf big bad bear that we was always afraid of. So we're all gonna align our propaganda and align our media function to make sure that we, ostracize him and paint this picture of him. And it's kind of shocking, right? Because from my perspective, a lot of the language that they're using is language that you see them use not only with foreign adversaries, but also domestic adversaries. Like the language you hear them using to describe them is the same language you heard them describe black activists, blacks, black nationalists, or black people that sought to bring black people to a progressive line, like how they labeled Martin Luther King, how they labeled Malcolm X, Khalid Muhammad, just the Black Panthers. They're using the same playbook to make this white guy look just as bad as they used to try to make the black guys and the Arabs and the Asians in America look. And that's the fun. I don't know if they think we've all kind of missed history class, or really don't know, or have no idea of what COINTELPRO was and COINTELPRO was, and the language that was used. Like there are some FBI redacted documents that's out there, right? There's history, there's documentaries, there's a lot of information excuse me, that will provide us with correlations of the language that they're using to describe Putin. So it's weird, right? It's like this, it's like, wow, like, you guys want to make this man look bad, but it's like you're using the same tactics. So for those of us who don't have a dog in a fight, we can clearly see, this language, right, coming a mile away, right? And for me, like, that's the disturbing part, because it's like, using that generalized language to talk about a geopolitical foe is kind of short-sighted to me, and kind of misguiding the citizenry, because instead of you telling the truth, like, yo, he just wants to get this back based on this, that, and the third, you're like, oh, he's a bad guy, he's killing babies. And we never stop to think about all the countries we bomb, right? We never stop to think. And I'm an army veteran, right? So I've been in invasions, right? So, and it's weird how like all these sanctions and all this stuff, and it's like, why does this not go in reverse when we do things, right? And it's like, it's almost like, if white society says that a person is bad, everything they say needs to happen gets done. But other people that's not white, we can't sanction, like African Americans can't sanction America for slavery and Jim Crow and just systematic oppression, period. Like, we can't go and be like, yo, we want to sanction this oligarch, we want to sanction Donald Trump. We can't go do that. But it's America can do it, right? And that's just based on them being the only empire, like the only voice. And what Putin is trying to do is reestablish himself along with China as an opposing voice, as an opposing force. Like, you keep hearing all this, from the onset of the war, America was painting the picture of how the war would play out. Something that we never would see, where, confidential information is secret information is being put out there about the strategic moves of an adversary. right? A geopolitical adversary. So for me, it's like they prep the ground to get this nationalistic um thing going in America, to allow this, oh, he's the big bad guy, and point this finger at him. And then you have so many people that's joining in, stand with Ukraine, right? And most of the people that stand with Ukraine don't even know where Ukraine is at, don't really have a historical idea of what Ukraine is. And there's a lot of things going on in Ukraine that we're not privy to, but we're all smart enough to know that 9 times out of 10, that government in Ukraine was propped up by America. And not to say whether that's a good or bad thing, because that's what empires do. They put people in place that they want to have a relationship with that will pump democracy, right? Because democracy is a drug. Democracy is a product, right? And the more places you get democracy, the better chances America can have an influence over that democracy in that country and allow them to place assets there to keep their eyes on their adversaries. That's what it's all about, playing the civilization game. So for me, it's just it's a unique time to be alive, watching this live history play out, but it's also eye-opening in the sense that America hasn't changed its playbook when it's trying to villainize someone. It's the same playbook. It's the same get on the news and say they're a bad person. The same language they use to describe Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael is the same language they're using to describe a white guy in the far regions of Europe, right? Or what we know as Eurasia. Because Europe is not really a continent. Europe is a geopolitical concoction, right? That was created to create a separation between the ethnic whites and the Asians and Mongolians that exist, in the east of Russia, in the east, you know what I mean? So it was kind of to separate themselves. So they gave it like a white name, Europe, right? To denote whiteness. And as we see, as this war plays out, we're seeing a lot of language that kind of says, wow, here we have a war in this white nation. White kids are being killed. White cities are being bombed. We're above this. This is for Asian countries and African countries, third world countries, the uncivilized. We're civilized, right? Not taking into account that Europe has warred for years. They had 100-year war, World War I, World War II. Like, war is their game. Like, we could read back the Russian invasions, not Hitler, Hitler, but that's World War II. But things like, Napoleon going into Russia and things of that nature. So there's always been a prevalence of war within these white European countries. But over the last 60 or 70 years since World War II, they've kind of pictured themselves as these civilized people who've got beyond war and, are all about money and education and family and, just a Eurocentric ideology. And as we watch different media groups, no matter whether in America, no matter whether overseas, that are in white countries, this narrative of how could this happen here keeps playing over and over again, right? So there's these layers of white supremacy and these layers of whiteness that are fragile and that is a global standard. Like, whiteness is a global standard, and how could this global standard be damaged by Putin? So they're trying to make other Putin. They're trying to other him, make him this black guy and make him a Nazi. And he's not a Nazi. He's a white nationalist, but he's not a Nazi, right? And he's trying to separate himself from the Nazis and say Ukraine is a Nazi country. Now, I did some research on that, and I'm not going to say it's Ukraine writ large, but I will say there is an underlying nature of Nazism that's permeated particular regions of the country. And if you look at how the African immigrants and the Indian immigrants and the non-white immigrants, or refugees, should I say, refugees that's trying to flee the war, if you see how they're being treated at the border, like, prior to there being a fuss about them being treated like that, prior to they was getting pushed off buses and pushed off trains and made to walk hundreds of miles and for hours and hours and hours, they wasn't allowed to have the same, the same route or escape the same way the Ukrainians were, the Ukrainian citizens, white Ukrainian citizens were. So that in itself is troubling, but that goes along with the whole entire narrative of this war. The browning of Europe is an impediment and a detriment to Russia, because a white nationalist nation like Russia does not want, you know, black and brown babies or black and brown men impregnated. You know what I mean? It's just a civilization game. Like at the end of the day, this is a civilization game, and each civilization seeks to survive and not be diluted by other civilizations, right? So he's pretty much saying, like, everything in front of me is turning dark. Everything in front of me is becoming Western Americanized, and that's a detriment to me. That's a detriment to my culture, my civilization. And that's the conversation that Westerners, that's pro America, pro Western democracy, will not have. They won't have that conversation about these battles are just basically about civilization, basically about civilization surviving and thriving without dilution, right? I don't even know how to say the word. I'm not even trying, because that language I don't use. I don't think about, those type of things. I'm black. I stay with black people. I procreate with black people. So I can't exercise my brain to get outside of that orbit, you know what I mean, to think about what others are doing. I can't police other people's sexual activity in their relationships. I can hope and promote blackness and pro-blackness as a